Dear friends, warm welcome back. I hope you had a refreshing pause. We are going to continue now with the conference session number 4. The title of the session is Seeking Unity Amidst Division, the Witness of the Ecumenical Movement to a Fragmenting World. I am first going to give the floor for a short opening by Bishop Jonsson, and then I move forward presenting the speakers. Bishop, the floor is yours.
This has become my privilege here to say something at the beginning. Now, I said this morning that the purpose of the Stockholm Conference was not unity in the first place, but cooperation, because it was the idea of Söderblom and his generation that if churches only cooperated with important matters, they would also indirectly find their unity. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves of this concept. Söderblom made a distinction between the body of the church and the soul of the church. The body of the church was all the outward structures and also organization, hierarchies, even liturgies. That was the sort of outward, visible part of church life. And that was different because every culture or history and culture had shaped every church so that they were different. And Söderblom really said that you must respect the difference between churches, respect their individuality and allow them to be whatever they are in that outward respect. But a church, to be a true church, must have an authentic faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. There is an inner life, a soul of the church, and the soul is the common faith that is shared by all churches, regardless how different they are. So it was really the spiritual thing that mattered, and in that sense they talked about what we in later years have called spiritual ecumenism. They were united in the spirit, and they talked very much about the spirit, the Christian spirit, the common Christian spirit would permeate all the institutions, the governments, the organizations, and so forth. So this distinction between body and soul made it possible for all the churches, regardless of how different they were, to cooperate and do things together and thereby move the world forward. And I think this sort of, now in very simplistic terms, but this kind of an understanding of ecclesiology made it possible at that time, when it was so full of conflicts, it made it possible to gather the churches almost under a guarantee that they would not infringe on each other, but support each other and respect each other and also share whatever they had to share. And therefore also the Stockholm meeting was filled with worship and prayer. They made a special hymnal in several languages for it. And Söderblom was very much interested in sort of lifting up the spiritual unity of people, otherwise divided. So that was the background of life and work. And in one sense, I think this kind of theology still is alive in that part of the ecumenical movement.
Your Eminence, you are talking about a soul, but I think truly it was the common foundation of the Bible. Huh? They were united in the same faith in the Bible, in the heritage of Judaism and Christianism, and because it has to do with the creed. Yes,
of course. He talked about the outward structure as something that was shaped by history and culture. And I think so far he's right, of course. but he also spoke about the common heritage, the Christian heritage, and that's why also the very real presence of the Nicene Creed in the Stockholm meeting was so important, because that was really the symbol of everything that bound the churches together.
Thank you once again, Bishop, for these excellent opening words that already prompted discussion. I thought that since we might not necessarily know each other or remember everything about each other, that I would present the panelists this time really shortly. We have 3 persons here on the panel. We have Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson, who is the General Minister and President at the United Church of Christ. She's a writer and poet, a theologian with passion for justice, and member of the Central Committee. We have Father Nicolas Kazarian, from the Ecumenical Patriarchate in New York, and also a Central Committee member. And we have Mrs. Maha Milki Wehbe, who is an agricultural engineer, and she's married to a Orthodox priest who's with us. Warm welcome. Maha is active on women's and children's rights in particular, and she has been involved in WCC since very long time. I would propose that we move on in this order, and as in the previous sessions, we would first hear all the 3 speakers and then start a conversation with you. So, Karen Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Our panel conversation for this afternoon, Seeking Unity Amidst Division, the Witness of the Ecumenical Movement to a Fragmenting World, leads to really thinking about the world and the ways in which we are divided on so many levels. Our ability to care for each other and to attend to the needs of this planet are perpetually challenged by the divisions that are present among us. Our commitments to justice are not always consistent, nor can we rely on the whole of Christendom to rally to support the same causes. As the history of the church has taught us, divisions in the church are not new. I would say in this current moment, and I'm going to speak really from a U.S. context. That's where I currently reside. And I'm also going to speak a little bit about our church and that context as well in regards to this particular question that's before us. I would say that some of the current divisions that are manifesting themselves among us are theological. They reflect the differences that are present both in the church and in the members of the church. And those are 2 distinctions that I would make, because I think that there are diversities that are present in the people, and then there are diversities that are present in the types of churches where they're located, and that, I think, also contributes to how we experience the church in its various contexts. The witness of the Stockholm Conference, I believe, is a reference that we could use now as we attend to the witness of the church for today. And I think that some of what I said earlier in the last panel applies here. The witness of the 1925 conference, I believe, was not comprehensive and perhaps calls for a critical look at the conference, what was not addressed, who did not attend, and what the choices were that were made for prioritizing those who attended. So I think that in and of itself speaks to some of the divisions that were already present. And so even in the moment where the Stockholm Conference brought folks together, I think for conversation and for collaboration, as Bishop Jonas has said to us, I think that there were still pieces that were missing that really, I think in this moment, if we are to look at Stockholm, look at the history of the ecumenical movement, for what we can learn and take away, that we have to address those things, or we would not be able to attend to our contemporary context. So even as the conference gave birth to the Life and Work movement, the churches, I think, were able to respond to social, political, and international challenges. And I think that those three aspects of life and work are extremely relevant when we talk about the unity of the body, because if we're not able to, I think, actively engage on behalf of each other, then the unity of the church, I think, will continue to be threatened, because that divide is always going to be there. So a couple of things. Colonization was a predominant economic system which provided wealth for Western Europe at the expense of indigenous people and African people who were sold as chattel. And in the Americas and in Europe, there was the emergence of the use of indentured labor, particularly from the Asian context, as cheap labor when emancipation happened. One of the primary divisions for the church in the United States was the Civil War. And the Civil War, which was mentioned earlier, in the United States was fought over the enslavement of African and African people. And so to have this glaring omission, is something I think that we, in our contemporary context, need to acknowledge. The focus on the social gospel and change did not begin to ably address the challenges of racism and the privileging of whiteness. In 1925, while there was a focus on collaboration, there was, I would say, some selectivity, and there were many who were omitted from the conversation. So I think in this moment, as we look at how we seek unity in the midst of the division that is present, one of the primary issues right now is around theology. And I would amplify that in the context of and I'm going to use terminology that we use in the United States and talk about white Christian nationalism, right? And I would say that historically, and this is post-1925, the emergence of what I would call faulty theologies, and particularly, I would say, the co-opting of Christianity has been problematic to Christian unity. So if we're going to talk about how we seek unity in the midst of the divisions, it has to be incumbent that theology as an enterprise is addressed, because those theological narratives continue to be problematic, and that's some of what we're seeing, not just in the United States, but globally, right? So where is the role and work of theology when we talk about things like social and moral problems, or even international relations, right? When there are foundational principles that are problematic to people's living, but it's framed and couched in language that involves the church, calls the church into supporting some of these narratives. How do we address those? So I want to really offer a couple of points around seeking unity in this particular moment, with Stockholm as a framework and informing this moment 100 years later. I do believe that we need to be looking truthfully at the current challenges in our countries and around the world. And for me, that means that we're addressing the systemic issues that are present and pervasive. When I say systemic issues, we're talking about root causes. We talked earlier about racism. Colonialism keeps coming up, and how some countries are able to have, let's go with economic thriving, while others do not. So you look contextually, outside of Europe and even in some European countries, and you see the legacy of colonialism. Some countries are doing far better than others because some have more wealth than others, because they gained more wealth from other people than others did. So how we talk about those historic truths in the context of systemic issues is going to be important. I think we also need to provide spaces for what I would identify as civil discourse, that our ability to have conversation has eroded over time. So when you think about Stockholm, people coming together across differences that are identified, but are addressed as not being challenging to the opportunity for collaboration, I would say that some of that has broken down in some of our settings. So what are the frameworks that we need for conversation in a way that transcends some of the differences that have now been problematized among us, whether that's race, theology, dogma, ideologies? How do we move beyond those in a way that would bring us to really looking at, I think, the aspirational witness of the ecumenical movement for this time? I would also say that focusing on the gospel becomes important as well. And I think in that, what it means for us to hold and identify a God of love, what it means to provide theological frameworks that are going to be counter-narratives to some of the hate that is being espoused as Christian doctrine. And also, I would say, the suffering that people are experiencing as a result of what is being labeled as Christianity. I would also identify theological literacy, right? And I'm not even talking about a theological education. I'm talking about how do we in the church even know, understand, and talk about God. I went to Union Seminary, and I had Professor Jim Cone for systematic theology. And I'll never forget, the first day of systematic theology, he said, "Theology is God talk. We all are theologians because we all do God talk." Right? And if we start with that as that was his first sentence, right? If we start with that as a premise, what are our expectations of God talk in the church? And I'm not sure that we have the language, the theological, the basics to have these kinds of conversation. This was said before, but I'll name it again. Education versus miseducation and disinformation, right? Disinformation is intentional. is the intentional dissemination of information that is incorrect. Misinformation is passing on disinformation, whether it's by intention or design. And so our Christian education, our spiritual formation, and our ability towards Christian unity is being significantly disrupted by misinformation that is presented and the disinformation that I believe is also being put out by those who espouse what we would say are far-right ideologies that may not even have religious substance, much less Christian theological substance. The last two things that I want to just mention, one is I do think that collaborative strategies are going to be necessary when we talk about Christian unity, that coming together is not enough. Right? That coming together has to include an intention and perhaps more intentionality around living into the Lund principle that says that we should be more collaborative in the areas where we can be collaborative. In the years of being a part of the ecumenical movement, it feels that we've relegated the Lund principle to principle and intellectual machinations, and not necessarily to how we can operationalize that in the quest for Christian unity. The last thing that I would say, and I think that this is one of the things that I really appreciate about the Stockholm Conference, is in its commitment to collaborative strategies and to collaboration, what it was able to do was to bring people together, right? And I think that coming together becomes essential to transcend the divides, right? So we're talking about divisions that sometimes preclude us from even being in the same rooms with others with whom we share faith. So I just want to put those on the table. I know we're going to have time for questions, and just identify that our ability to even name what the divisions are among us is going to be essential for the unity that we seek.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a powerful start with all these fundamental ground work and ground elements towards unity that you presented. Let us continue with Father Nicolas Kazarian. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And with your permission, I would like to recognize this afternoon His Eminence Metropolitan Chrysostom of Messenias, who is professor at the University of Athens and is among us today. He's one of the brightest theologians of our Orthodox Church today, and we are very grateful for him to share his time with us today. Thank you. Your Eminences, Your Graces, Excellencies, dear sisters and brothers in Christ, Christ is risen. And I think it's even though we are in the fourth week that we are repeating Christ is risen, it is indeed a true joy to come together, especially when Christianity as a whole, from east to west, celebrates the Feast of the Resurrection together. And coming together during this season, this Paschal season, I think adds to the beauty and inspiration of today's conference. With gratitude and humility, I offer these reflections as we mark the centennial of the Stockholm Conference on Life and Work. Convened in 1925 by, as it was said, Archbishop Nathan Söderblom, that landmark gathering boldly affirmed that Christians, despite doctrinal differences, could and must act together in service to a suffering world. It was not only a call to dialogue, but a call to witness, a pioneering step in social ethics grounded in the mystery of baptism and our shared confession of Christ's sacrificial love as proclaimed during the First Ecumenical Council. I'm grateful to Bishop Jonas for his outstanding presentation this morning, honored to participate in this panel and looking forward to the discussion. Bishop Johnson rightly connected the Stockholm Conference to a moment of hope where the trauma of the First World War, a time when the Church bore deep wounds engraved in the lives of millions. In this fragile post-war context, the Stockholm gathering became a sign of emerging ecumenical awareness, to a certain extent more inclusive and more participative than the Edinburgh Conference of 1910. Crucially, Stockholm included official Orthodox representatives, notably Patriarch Photios of Alexandria, that was mentioned this morning, and who unfortunately died right after, on his way back, whose presence responded to the 1920 encyclical of the Ecumenical Patriarchate unto the churches of Christ everywhere, which stated, "If the different churches are inspired by love and place it above all else, they will diminish existing dissensions. Through brotherly concern and mutual aid, many good things will be achieved for the glory and benefit of the Christian body." End of quote. This Orthodox openness inspired Sadelblom to propose the Ecumenical Conference, and by March 1920, a preparatory committee had already begun its work. In the same spirit, 100 years later, the Graymore Ecumenical Interreligious Institute, based in New York City, convened a dialogue gathering bishops and ecumenical officers from the Roman Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, and the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, and their discussion is centered on polarization, both within and among our churches. 3 core questions were raised. What is driving fragmentation within our communion? What are its causes and consequences? And finally, what signs of hope can we discern amid these challenges? These are not theoretical concerns. They speak directly to the life of the Church and her gospel witness. Stockholm had already anticipated this insight that an ecumenical ethos is also, and above all, an ethos of solidarity. In 1925, Orthodoxy faced profound upheaval, the collapse of the Russian Empire and its conciliar life after 1917, mass migration of Orthodox faithful to Western Europe, the end of the Ottoman Empire, the Greco-Turkish War, and the catastrophic population exchange of 1923. Amid this instability, the Orthodox Church embraced the idea of practical Christianity as a foundation for unity. From an Orthodox standpoint, fragmentation arises not only from theological disagreements, but also from the temptation to align ecclesiastical identity with political or ideological agendas. In a polarized world, churches can become entangled in nationalism, masking fear and resentment as zeal for tradition. This is often described as Balkanization, a splintering of church life into isolated identities cut off from the Catholic nature of the church. But this challenge is not exclusive to Orthodoxy. Across denominations, debates over moral teaching, authority, and identity have led to echo chambers of divisions. The pastoral consequences are grave: disenchantment, mistrust, alienation, and a quiet exodus from church life, which we also call secularization. Moreover, the weaponization of Christian faith in global conflicts called the Church to reclaim her prophetic role. But such a voice must rise above ideology, remaining rooted in the gospel, discipleship, and not partisanship. Despite these challenges, there are signs of hope, and we try to explore some of them in the morning. Ecumenical dialogue offers tools for reconciliation that can be applied within our own communities. Too often dismissed as religious diplomacy, the ecumenical movement may in fact be a vital means by which God heals from within. Dialogue cultivates humility, listening, and mutual accountability, virtues capable of softening deep divisions. What ultimately unites us is not policy, but sacramentality, our participation in the mystery of Christ's economy manifesting the Church in her Catholicity. This incarnational vision is central to Orthodox ecclesiology. In the liturgy, we do not simply remember Christ, we become one with Him. Ecclesial unity is therefore not uniformity, but communion, participation in the very life of the Holy Trinity and in one another. So reflecting on the 1925 theme, Doctrine Divides, Service Unites, we might today add nuance to that. Doctrine matters, while service remains the most immediate and tangible expression of unity. Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson already alluded to the Lone Principle of 1952 that churches should act together in all matters unless deep conviction requires otherwise. This principle remains relevant today. Our conversations are not the fruit of uniformity, but a spiritual solidarity, a refusal to accept polarization as inevitable, and a shared commitment to act as one. Instruments like the Church Commission, CCIA, for example, help us embody this commitment in very practical ways. And the future will show how our shared witness continues the legacy of Stockholm. What can Orthodoxy can offer in this ecumenical journey? Well, first, a rich theology of koinonia, communion, as the basis of Christian life. Second, a spiritual tradition that prioritizes the healing of the heart, the catharsis, as a precondition for reconciliation. And third, the enduring leadership of the Ecumenical Patriarchate, which has consistently championed dialogue, peace, and human dignity. As His Holiness Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew affirmed in Geneva while visiting the World Council of Churches in 2018, I quote, "We are called to transcend the divisions of the past and work together for unity in truth and love. The unity we seek is not uniformity, but communion in the love of Christ." End of quote. This is not simply an ecclesial goal. It is an eschatological vision. The kingdom of God breaks into our fractured present through every act of reconciliation. Following the Holy and Great Council of the Orthodox Church convened by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 2016, the same Patriarchate blessed the remarkable document called For the Life of the World Toward the Social Ethos of the Orthodox Church. And this text echoes life and works priorities, not as a legal code, but as a kingdom-oriented vision. Life in Christ is a dynamic process of transformation, a metanoia, a conversion of heart and mind. As the text declares, Christians are obliged to act as a prophetic presence in the world, addressing not only the baptized, but the whole world, creation, summoning all to justice and mercy. Finally, this century is more than a commemoration. This centennial is more than a commemoration. It is a continuation of a movement of the Holy Spirit. The Stockholm Conference dared to imagine a Christianity capable of working for peace and justice despite his wounds. That same spirit calls us now not to ignore our differences, but to take our desire for unity in Christ above all else. Orthodox participation in 1925 was significant not only in ecumenical terms, but also in deepening engagement with questions of social ethics, culture, and the Church's mission in the world. Polarization cannot be healed by strategy alone. It requires repentance, humility, and transformation, not only individually, but communally. Healing comes not through allegiance to our factions, but through fidelity to Christ. May this celebration renew our resolve to walk together and serve together by God's grace to be made one. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed. In particular, I would like to thank you for bringing up the idea of unity as a process and its dynamic nature, also connected with healing from within that we might come back to in the discussion. Now I give the floor to Maha, Milki, Wehbe, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm sorry to be the last speaker of the day and you're all tired. I'll try not to be long. I start with Al-Masih Qam, Christos Anesti. On August 19th, 1925, an impressive gathering was convened in Stockholm, grouping Anglicans, Lutheran, and Orthodox clergy and laity from 37 countries. Sorry, Your Eminence, some to be repeated. Many of whom were delegates representing their countries, and the event was heralded as a milestone in the ascending path of ecumenism, or what became to be called the ecumenical movement. This conference came in the aftermath of World War I, which left the world shattered. However, Europe at that time was a continent where Christianity was thriving and embedded in the lives of people and in the social order of their countries. The lives of people and in the social order of their countries, the gatherers at the Stockholm Conference were hoping that the Christian values would permeate politics, culture, and even the institutions of the League of Nations, as it was called then. Their aim was the restoration of the spiritual and moral fiber of these institutions, communities, and nations. This conference was deemed ecumenical owing to the presence of the Orthodox in it, especially that of Photius, the Patriarch of Alexandria, to the point that some resembled it to that of the First Ecumenical Council held in Nicaea in 325, especially with the King of Sweden presiding and delivering a moving speech. 6 overall themes were listed for the conference: the general obligation of the Church in the light of God's plan for the world, the Church and economic and industrial problems, the Church and social and moral problems, the Church and international relations, the Church and education, ways and means for promoting cooperation between the churches and for their closer association on federal lines. Reflecting on all this, we seek to be inspired by the Conference of Stockholm and by the deliberations that took place in it, and especially by the spirit that permeated it, where, for example, and I am listing this for its symbolic significance, the clergy were praying together in the clerical vestments of their churches together, showing the kind of spirit that grouped them together in unison. Their aim was to address these problems, not to engage, as important as that is, in doctrinal deliberations which are important to take place as well. The themes set for the conference are as pertinent and relevant today as they were then. But what makes the issue more challenging is that the overall spiritual and moral demeanor has diminished in Europe and is facing extreme challenges elsewhere. where Christians feel threatened and afraid, and where the erosion of values and morality is sweeping the globe as a result of so many factors, chief among which is the social media. The world today is fragmented and fragmenting continually, and the ecumenical spirit is losing some of its zest as a result of the laxity of many of its proponents and institutions, in addition to the increasing rise of fundamentalism among many Christians, which is curtailing at times demonizing the ecumenical spirit. The spirit of Stockholm needs to reinfuse us with the zeal that prompted those assembled in it to action. It is this challenge which needs to be addressed at the level of the WCC, its member churches, and the different programs associated with it, which have a tendency at times to become fossilized in the modus vivendi which they have become accustomed to follow. The aim is to think outside the box and to reclaim the Stockholm Conference spirit and the motives and motivations which led to it. Let us start with modest initiatives, hoping that they would snowball into partial fruition by the effort of us all. It's important to note that we have been in a highly volatile conflict area. And here I am talking as a Middle Eastern, which includes Palestine and sure Gaza, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and others for a long time before and after the establishment of the Middle East Council of Churches. In 1974, and we just celebrated its 50th Jubilee, and after its smaller in size predecessor, which became completely ecumenical with the joining of the Catholic family to it in the 20th century. I have been, with my husband, associated with MECC since its inception, Middle East Council of Churches, participating in its activities and representing it with him in various activities and conferences in Lebanon and abroad, culminating in me heading its women's program and him heading the important program of pastors, grouping some of them periodically for many years. We have worked with all the programs, and in the women program we had women from all Christian denominations, and we had the same language, working for 13 years together. The work of MECC was in line with the spirit and scope of vision of the Stockholm Conference, and had been for many years a living testimony of the fellowship between the various churches and the believers in them, fostering a spirit of unity and fellowship badly needed today. We hope that it continues to do so. Furthermore, I would like to point out that I've been representing the Orthodox Church and the Middle East in the women's program of the WCC since early 90s, and for the gender working group in the last 7 years, attending all general assemblies since Harare in 98 as a delegate of my church. And just as Peter was saying today, let's have signs of hope and look at some of them. In early 90s, when I used to attend Bosse workshops, so many of them, I used to be the only Orthodox among 30 or 35 women there. And here now, just look how many Orthodox are being participating, representing, and here the Greek Orthodox Church is inviting also everybody and the CCIA people. So see the difference between 1990 and now. Isn't this a sign of hope? I would like to conclude with a personal note that I have sent a concept note to CCIA for a psychosocial support project for children and mothers for South Lebanon in the aftermath of the recent war we had from Israel on the south of Lebanon that displaced 100,000 people from their houses, but have not gotten a response yet. I wish our meeting optimal fruition. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Maha, for these concrete signs of hope and also concrete ideas of how to get move forward. Now, I'd like to ask the panelists if they want immediately to comment on one another, or we move. No, nothing particular you want to say. So we move directly to questions from the audience. Now, as it happens, I wouldn't know all of you, and even those that I know, I suddenly forget your name, or I might risk mispronunciation. So I wouldn't call anyone by name, but just try to be alert and see everyone who wants to ask and contribute. So please show either with your name tag or raising your hand who would like to pose the first question.
Thank you all for your presentation. And I am realizing it's very diverse. You're coming from different perspectives. I want to know who benefits from these divisions that you were talking about, and what are the drivers of this unity, you think?
Can you repeat the other parts? Who benefits from the division and?
Yeah, I wanted to know who benefits from these divisions that you have spoken about, and second, what are the drivers of these divisions?
Excellent question. Drivers and those who benefit from divisions. Any other immediate? Yes, please.
Much. I'm sure if I'm allowed to make an intervention or a speech, but as I was listening to the presentations, and since, as my wife said, I've been involved in the ecumenical movement for a long time, I just need to make two comments, and I don't know to whom they address, maybe to you or to Father Nicolas, whoever wants to. And this is something that I have been saying for a long time in our country and abroad. I think there are two challenges facing ecumenism today. And I'd like to stress on these two challenges because I felt them strongly in many circles. The first is that there is an increasing attack and even demonization, as Maha said, of the ecumenical movement, going to branding it as heretical and the people who embrace it as so. This is a challenge. We are hearing so much about that and reading it on in the social media and elsewhere, and I have been personally attacked for that, being a person who proposed as a proponent of the ecumenical movement. The second is that I think that there has to we have to embrace a strategy to make ecumenism reach out the grassroots level, because without this it remains a dialogue within closed doors, committees and specialists. It needs to reach down to grassroots level, and this strategy needs to be spread and needs to be heavily embraced, not only in a theoretical, like putting it on paper, but to working to transpose it to praxis, and maybe embracing a media strategy that is aimed at ecumenism reaching the grassroots level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Perhaps we pause already here to hear the three panelists on these two sets of issues. the division, who benefits from them, what the drivers are, and the attacks on the ecumenical movement and how to bring it to the grassroots level. Perhaps we could go in the same order. Karen Georgian, please.
Thank you for the questions. I'm not sure about the benefits. Like the who benefits. I do think that I'm going to speak into some of our U.S. context, right? I think if there's a group that benefits from some of the divisions, I would say that it is in some of the realm of Christian nationalism, right? Which I don't even see as Christian, but since there's nothing else to call it, that's what I refer to it. So I think that because what begins to happen, particularly around the divisions, is that it comes down to, I think, seeing, and this question actually flows into the other question that was asked, right? I think that a part of it is this divisiveness around justice issues, especially in the church, as being relevant to Christians. So in this nationalistic movement, what you find are individuals who are anti-immigration, anti lots of things that as Christians we would say would be important around, like loving your neighbor and, So, and I think that some of the drivers around the divisions are really in the realm of like a lack of education and also assumptions, right? So I hear quite often assumptions on both sides of the theological divide, and our theological divide is further complicated by politics, right? By a political divide. So I would say both of those things. And so also to, kind of increasing attacks on the ecumenical movement. Some of it is coming from the same place, because I would say in the U.S. context, right-wing Christians are not a part of the ecumenical movement, right? It's questionable where some of that is coming from, because I wouldn't even say that is coming from a particular denominational context or any of that, because some of it is really ideological, and it's working its way into our denominational context. So I can't even say it's coming out of one place, and the ideology has been there. Ideologies have been there for a long time. So I think that that is really providing some challenges for the ecumenical movement in our context. I would name that because I served as the ecumenical officer for our church for eight years. In a context before becoming the head of church. And I think that this question about grassroots ecumenism and how the ecumenical movement functions in the pews, right, has always been a question. I think it's dealt with in different ways, perhaps in different contexts, right? So I would say in the United Church of Christ, the majority of our ecumenical agreements, our ecumenical commitments are actually being realized, probably not in as large of a scope as we would like, but it's hard for ecumenism to flourish if it's not at the grassroots, because it cannot be sustained in a church-to-church way or from an institutional standpoint. I think that there's probably more grounding needed at the grassroots level than we currently have. And I think that's always going to be a challenge as, pastors leave and staff turnover, to make sure that our clergy and in our case our laity have the ecumenical formation that is needed to provide the leadership in the church.
Thank you. Father Nicolas?
Yeah. So if I can piggyback on what Reverend Dr. Thompson just said, especially when it comes to opposition to the ecumenical dialogue and who it benefits, doesn't benefit, what really amazed me, especially during the context of COVID, is how the question or the opposition to the ecumenical dialogue came and completed this ideological galaxy of alternative reality where, conspiracy theory will adopt aspect or ideas or attributes of the way they see the world and mix it all together, create a wonderful smoothie of conspiracy ideas. But the bottom line is, while they are looking at a more traditional way of addressing or more reclaiming tradition in looking at the church as being isolated, they are the one actually creating the artificial reality in which they live. And I found it very striking to see how the notion of ecumenical dialogue was opposed, especially during the COVID pandemic, added to the issue of vaccine, added to the issue of global governance, and all of that created a new narrative around which those who were against the vaccines were also against the ecumenical dialogue and against a series of things. But there are signs of hope, and to finish with that, I'm also convinced that the way they're wrong is the fact that there's no more traditional ways of looking at church relations than dialogue itself. And looking at centuries of history, the church has come together in dialogue, not always agreed on things, but the basic relationship that churches will carry over would always be through dialogue, either in person or through other means. Finally, because we need to also uplift ourselves when we talk about the attacks against and the misrepresentations of the ecumenical dialogue. So we started a couple of years ago at Hellenic College Holy Cross in Boston. So I'm also the ecumenical officer for the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America under the Ecumenical Patriarchate. And so a couple of years ago we started this Huffington Ecumenical Institute, where we actually provide trainings to seminarians and people interested in the Orthodox Church about ecumenical dialogue. And I've done 2 courses so far, one on the document and one on the visionaries, the people that really shaped the ecumenical dialogue through the 20th and 21st century. And what amazed me, not only I had like over 15 students in the class, which also respond to this impression that the younger generation is not interested in ecumenical relations, but also what really struck me is the fact that they wanted to learn the basic skills of dialogue. It's like during this COVID period, we have lost relationship as a human skill. And that's what we are trying to not reinvent, but reproduce with them, looking at how these ecumenical relationships that have been built through a century now have shaped our church and the ability of our churches to also interact, work together, and speak to the world. So, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Maha?
I just like to say that there's a big difference between the ecumenism in the Middle East and what they're talking about in the States. The culture, the possibilities, it's different, especially in our area. Afterwards, the ecumenical movement was at its best, in early 90s, for many 10 years, around 10 years or more. And people were thirsty to come together from different churches, and at the grassroots level, the leadership, we all mingled, we all met in the region and on the local basis. But things started changing and subsiding with time. So it needs a bit push, it needs a bit freshness, it was much more spiritual than now, the movement through all the countries around the area. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Maha. I have four and 5 questions. We take all these and then we have a round of answers. So we go first here, please.
Thank you, moderator. I realize that the discussion is about ecumenism and maybe the negative behavior of members of a church that officially belongs to the ecumenical movement and leads a dialogue in inter-Christian or bilateral or multilateral dialogues. And this happens. And I think, according to my research or my observation, this is due to lack of serious and fastidious information to the grassroots. The grassroots never are informed about the official dialogues, about the documents, and about the vision of this dialogue. And they are fanatic, more or less. But I would like to challenge the plenary, saying that there are so many millions of Christians, as the Pentecostals, evangelicals, that are not at the table. And what kind of ecumenism do we have with them? And it was my honor to present the World Council of Churches at the Global Christian Forum that does an excellent work, bringing at to the same table Pentecostals, evangelicals with the other members of other Christian denominations. Therefore, there is a lot of work to be done on the level of ecumenism.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate. That's why we're here at the ecumenical movement in the World Council of Churches together. Yeah, closer. Yeah, okay. Thank you. As ecumenical movement, churches being together, working together, exchanging views, ideas, helping each other, supporting, it's very important. That's part of the ecumenical movement. That's why all of us as Orthodox and Protestants also were together here in the World Council of Churches. I appreciate what also Father Nicolas said, that churches, in terms of dialogue, different churches coming together and learning from each other, their traditions, is important. Beyond that, unity for me is, I think, something remote from what I'm not a priest, but I come from the Orthodox Church, Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But dialoguing is extremely important, helping each other, supporting each other, learning from each other. The dialogue helps a lot for their communities also to live together in various ways, so they know, they learn from each other. That's very important. This is about the ecumenical movement. Even in the Orthodox Church, which I never saw, whether it is the Eastern or Oriental Orthodox Church, nowadays There are also, because of political pressure, churches are being divided now. My own church, for over 30 years, we had 2 synods. Because of the former patriarch, when the new government took over from the Bush in 1991, they told in writing, they told the patriarch to leave the church, otherwise we are not going to work with you. So if you want, you have to say you can take refuge in monasteries, we can provide whatever you need. This is a patriarch that has been there for years. So he has to leave the church, they're under pressure, so he has to disguise himself and change. So he was taken by a car to Nairobi, to Kenya. He took refuge outside the country and eventually ended up in the United States. That took 30 years to bring him back because the new government was changed. Then I was one of in the mediation. We established that mediators from outside. At that time I was with the World Council of Churches. So brought back, so united. So we brought back the patriarch. The patriarch in the country they assigned was from their own tribe. This is a tribal issue. That being now, the church is united, and now recently, this is about 2 years ago I'm talking about, again they divided the church on the basis of ethnic lines. Going to be 3 patriarchs. It was a terrible situation. Finally the church leadership, they protested. First they warned the government, it's going to be a chaotic situation. They were told to wear in black for 3 days, black, which is a sign of mourning in our church. All Orthodox followers were in black for 3 days. Government saw that. That is going to be serious. Finally they said, well, now we are going to demonstrate, we'll go out and die. That's why. These are the bishops that are saying this. When they go out and demonstrate and protest, government is already ready to shoot. So finally when the leadership, the top leadership, they saw this, they are the ones behind it, actually, in the division of these bishops, new bishops consecrated without the knowledge of the church, 27 of them. So being guarded outside somewhere by government forces. So this kind of division is also taking place in Ethiopia. Now finally, the Prime Minister himself got involved indirectly now with those separatist group. And finally he has to talk to them hard. Previously it was not. Finally he brought them back, the 3 of them organizing the division. And he said to the patriarch, I brought the lost sheep. This is what he said in the media. Okay, that was accepted. Now, but there is a negotiation that from that tribe more bishops have to be consecrated. So out of the 9 consecrated, 7 of them were from that tribe. So under pressure, really, not just because they wanted that to happen in the church. That was not the way we go. The church has no border, has no tribe, as far as we are concerned. So this is what happened. Finally that was settled somehow, although it is still simmering. Again in the northern Tigray, the same thing happened. They consecrated bishops. They're still under pressure, Ethiopia is already divided on lingual lines, on ethnic lines. This is even bringing one church together, which never happened in the Orthodox Church, which I never saw. It is also happening because of political pressure that we see. Just a comment really of what I observed in my own situation. For a church that has been there for over 2,000 years, an Ethiopian Orthodox Church. The eunuch of Ethiopia from the Bible, that the first convert in today's Gaza, that's where the first convert. And the church as a church with the Armenian churches is the first church maybe to come together as a beginning, the one of the oldest. Even Ethiopians before the birth of Christ, Ethiopians worshipped the Old Testament. And after the New Testament came, they incorporated that. So both the Bible, our Bible has both of them altogether. And that's why Ethiopian Orthodox tradition is called the Judeo-Christian tradition in Ethiopia. So we have these kind of challenges even within the church. And about the ecumenism, it's fine. We work together, we live together, we discuss together, we exchange views. But unity is a bit, the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox, I'm not a priest, I'm sorry, but are they in communion, for example? They are Orthodox churches. Are they in communion? Most of them, can they say, do go to the service? I don't think that is the case. So this is a situation for me, that's how I understand. But ecumenism is important, we're together, we understand together, we work, solve problems all around in the community, no problem. That's why we are together in the World Council of Churches. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We have 3 more interventions. Yes, please.
Thank you, moderator. Sure, I'm a bit hesitant after hearing our brother share. But I think it's relevant also to what he shared, what I'm going to just pick up on. And that is the theme of a theological discourse, which has come up from the speakers. Dr. Koren, her professor referenced that any talk about God is theology. It's not necessarily good theology, and that's potentially wherein the danger lies. But it's theological in its nature. And then Father Nicolas, I think helpfully, pointing out that it doesn't help to too quickly dismiss doctrine as divisive. Rather, it's something we should be engaging in deeper discourse around. To put in a binary relationship, doctrine, theology, and action, I think is dangerous. Nicaea itself, there were some really deep theological issues that were being thrashed out, and we're still talking about the filioque clause, but we're still talking about it. That's the point, even if we don't always reach agreement. So my question really relates to where is the space for this theological discourse, and we are also, we're talking really about Bible engagement, whether it's the person in the pew and their engagement with the Bible, or in the academy, in theological discussion in that context, in the context of within the churches and between the churches. And I think it may not be too simplistic to say that bad theology divides, but honest theology tends to unite, in purpose at least, even if not in full agreement. So how can we together ensure that within this ecumenical movement we don't lose the importance of doing theology well at whatever level? I just want to finish with the reference to my own country, which was also referenced earlier. So one of the key internal factors that led to the fall of apartheid was the fact that the Dutch Reformed Church was kind of like the national Afrikaner Church in South Africa, along with the sister churches, had developed a theological justification for apartheid. That was bad theology. The most significant internal movement that pulled away the foundation from apartheid was when the Dutch Reformed Church repented and joined other churches in declaring the theological justification of apartheid a heresy. So no longer did this religious nation of people have a distortion of the Bible on which to base their unjust action. So I think that's really probably a question and a plea, really. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. On this side, I saw one. Yes, please.
First, I'm Bishop Hovakim from Armenian Church. I'm first time for this meeting, and thank you for 3 presentations. Mine is rather a comment, actually, because I've been following. And remember a passage from a book. It was a conversation between a journalist and our late patriarch, Gargin I, who lived in Lebanon and then moved to Armenia. And it was about church and state relations, and he was asked, Jesus told that my kingdom is not from this heaven, from this earth. My kingdom is in heaven. How do you understand church and state relations? And he answered that he said, my kingdom is not from this earth, but he didn't say that we live outside of this world. So we, as Christians, we live in this world, and challenges exist in this world. So the church, Christianity in general, is a living organism, and the church is living organism. All the time it's developing, and we are facing new challenges. These are different. But at the same time, when we concentrate on challenges and the things that divide the churches, we will lose focus on doing other things that are more important and more pressing for generally humanity. So what is my comment as a commission, actually, which celebrate the centenary of Stockholm Conference, and we have to celebrate the unity that we have, acknowledge it, the level of unity that we have, and concentrate on main challenges that humanity today is facing. Today, just Archbishop also mentioned that genocide is happening in Palestine. Its country is under attack. 3 years ago, with the same manner, Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh were sieged in the medieval style, were encircled, and then were attacked and ethnically cleansed. The war didn't say anything. Today is happening the same in Palestine. And other things will happen. So as long as we keep silence, this will continue. So as a churches and the institution that represent the church, we have to concentrate on these challenges, trying to sort out. Unity we will build slowly, little by little. We are a diverse organism, and we can achieve in one goal, this unity. It's rather eschatological, but mission will unite us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, a final voice from the important back table. Yes.
Thank you. I have followed up all the panelists since we started today. And in all the presentations we have received, the fragmentation of the world is very obvious. Not only the world, families, communities, nations are fragmented, possibly due to maybe climate change, due to, I have listed something, political polarization, wars, and also economic inequality. Talking especially, focusing the African continent, because what is happening, Ninguzo had just mentioned Ethiopia, Sudan. These are generals that fought on the same camp, today killing their people. South Sudan, Nigeria, and other places. Things are not well. And looking at this fragmentation of communities, also churches all over, and in the light of the work of the CCIA that we're meeting these days to reflect on the Stockholm conference that held in 1925, when you compare what happened that even resulted to the call of that conference, it's nothing different today. So the question I want to ask, how can the ecumenical movement offer a transformative public witness that bridges division between churches, communities, nations, as we see today, given the fact that this meeting also is projecting the work of CCIA from 2025 to that is 2030. How can we have such recommendation that will enrich the work we'll do, to rethink, to redirect our work to respond to the current challenges, especially in the war nations that are facing conflicts today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We had 5 very important contributions and reflections, and a couple of questions as well. And I would like to turn to the panelists now for their final remarks. Please take up what you prefer, what you felt was important to comment on here at the last round. And here I would like to start with Maha, please.
Nothing much, no.
Then we go to Father Nicolas, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you all for your questions and the variety of approaches. I think what we all touch on is the way in which we define relationship, and how we touch on the nature and quality, almost virtue of relationships throughout the world. And the ecumenical dialogue and the ecumenical movement is only one manifestation of humanity trying to reclaim what relationship is all about. For us Christians, it is this fascinating goal of witnessing together Christ by coming together as one body. We heard what happened in South Africa, we heard what happened in Ethiopia, we heard the various mentions of the African context, North America. All of these elements, examples, point to that question of how do we define our living together by the quality of relationship that we are all part of. And I want to speak to that because in our theological discourses, we have words to define those relationships. And the one that comes to mind the most directly is the terms of koinonia, communion, which sometimes, and I remember having an intervention during the last Central Committee about the translation of the term koinonia when the General Secretary offered an interpretation as fellowship. Fellowship in the graduation of relationships is way under what we would call a communal relationship, a relationship of communion. And while we go through this process of coming together, learning about the other, developing the skills of dialogue and relationship, and I want to answer to Dr. Kukura's comment. Yes, it is a grassroots. It comes from the grassroots, but unless those who are caring for the grassroots manifest the identity of a church in relationship and in dialogue, it won't come just by itself. So there is a circularity of virtues here that comes from the coming together. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the final words to Karen Georgia, please.
So I want to comment, one, on the theological differences that divide. I would say that in this room, we have theological differences, but they don't divide because we choose to be present. I think where some of it becomes challenging, particularly in our context, is the divide that comes from the right that is layered with politics. So there's a political element that is present with that theology, and so it becomes divisive, because I would say in some ways that it's also antithetical to what we hold as core values for our Christianity as a part of the ecumenical movement. So I think that's where the tension comes in some of our context, and I would go as far as probably naming some of that as extremist in terms of a radicalized Christianity. The other point that I just wanted to make was in terms of this idea of what kind of recommendations can we provide into the ecumenical movement, right? For addressing contemporary issues. I think that's going to be important because I think that coming out of this conversation and looking at it's been interesting, this 100-year reflection, right? And thinking about this aspect of life and work and what has happened in these 100 years. In some of my reflections, which is not specific to the question, and this was actually by way of something else that I was preparing for. In 1925, Hitler's Mein Kampf was published, right? So you look at that as at a 100-year mark as well, and what happened shortly after Stockholm with regard to what happened in Europe, right? And you start to ask the question of, and what is the role of the church in bringing voice in the midst of crisis, right? Because that was a crisis, and there were Christians who were involved there as well. So what does that mean for us 100 years later as we're looking at our world? And so I think the recommendations in this moment are not just about Stockholm, but I think it's also about the climate that surrounded that 100-year anniversary, and what are some of the things that we need to be mindful of for the context out of which the conference came, because I don't think we've addressed some of that in our discussions today.
Thank you very much. Now this will conclude the session. Before we move to evening prayer, please join me in thanking the excellent panelists. Thank you.